Hi, in this video, I'm going to cover Nextracker, which provides solar tracker solutions to companies that build and operate solar power plants. So let's start with the business model. Um, as I said, they provide solar tracker and software solutions to utility scale solar projects. So these are not rooftop projects like residential projects. Yeah, these are utility scale projects. If you don't understand what solar trackers are, don't worry, I'll cover that in the following slides. Generally, these products, if you look at the statistics, they tend to improve the productivity of projects or the generation potential of the project by 30 to 40% as they follow sun's movement to capture maximum light and energy and kind of convert that using photovoltaic cells. They provide both hardware and software solutions, which means the tracker which kind of rotates the solar panels to follow the movement, and the software that goes with it in operations and maintenance. And so far they have 100 gigawatts of installed capacity. So basically the projects in which they have installed their trackers have a combined capacity of more than 100 gigawatts. And let's look at segments. So 70% of their revenue is US and 30% is the rest of the world. In the long run, they say roughly two-thirds will come from the US and 30% from rest of the world. A large majority of their revenues come from the hardware and the services, the maintenance services, operation services. So that's making roughly almost all of their revenue, 98%, and 1 to 2% right now is coming from software, although that portion is increasing. But right now it's pretty small. They are serving 200 customers across 30 countries, and these customers are involved in different stages of the life cycle of solar project development. These may be EPCs, engineering, procurement, and construction companies. They may be the operators, with whom they have long-term contracts. But most likely, like most of the customers are EPCs, people who are building and handing over these solar projects. So let's look a closer look at their products. You understand how solar trackers work roughly. So this is a kind of a snapshot of what a solar tracker looks like. So this is, you can see this is a module solar panel, and then this is basically like a tube that can rotate. So it has a freedom of 60 degrees, basically a total freedom of movement of 120 degrees around this axis. So this is the axis of rotation, and there are different things installed. So let's look at the mechanical and drive components, which basically make this tube rotate around its center so that the solar panels rotate with it. The electronic control systems, the battery, and the controller, all of them are basically co-located here on this axis. They have specialty modules, the weather station, as they say, number 4, basically this section with which they can sense the weather, wind, probably the angle of the sun. The wireless mesh networks is basically the sensors they put on these devices to collect data. For instance, that may be again the temperature, the wind speed, the maybe the cloudiness, or the shade that's prevalent on that solar panel, or the rate of energy that's being produced. So all these things, they kind of they have sensors embedded in their product, in their hardware product. And finally, the software for monitoring, controlling these assets, these large scale solar projects. So you can see that the typical tracker, as I said, it's basically this beam which has a torque tube, and then this beam can rotate around its axis, and they take the solar panel along with it. And that these trackers tend to be, as I said, roughly 300 feet in length, and you can kind of install multiple modules on one tracker, right? So this is one module, and then there is another module next to it. So this basically constitutes one row. So this is what their product visually looks like. And so let's talk about the hardware part of their product. So their main product is called NX Horizon Tracker, which is their flagship product, and used in a large majority of their projects. And now, as you can see, there are basically, these projects are divided in many rows. So what independent rows? So these are some of the features of their product. So independent rows here means that each row has the ability to kind of rotate independently, like irrespective of the angle of the other row. So all of them can be tilted at different angles. And why would you want them tilted at different angles? There are many reasons. There may be clouds in the sky, and every row may have a different optimum angle to capture the maximum amount of light. There may be shading from the rows in the front, on the rows on the back. So there may be shading, on the back rows, and those rows may need to kind of tilt at a different angle. You may need to clean these solar panels. So it's easier if you kind of go in this aisle between two panels. It's easier if both of them are facing each other, so that you can kind of clean both of them at the same time. So there are many different reasons why you may want both of them at different alignment. So their product basically allows for different alignment for different rows. These panels are self-powered, which basically means that you don't need external power supply to rotate them, external AC power supply or anything like that. There's a small panel installed on the row itself, small solar panel, which charges a motor, like a DC motor that they have installed on this, and also there's a controller, like, which is powered by that battery. And so when that basically battery charges, it operates the motor and it powers the controller, so that they can collect data and kind of rotate these panels. So they're self-powered. Basically, the motor is also powered by a small solar panel, which is installed on a row itself. These are mechanically balanced rows. So one way to explain this is, you can look at this figure, and so this is basically taken from one of their patents, in which they kind of explain how they basically reduce the amount of power consumption by the motor. So you can assume that this as I said, these rows are self-powered, right? So you would want to use the energy of the motor optimally to rotate the panels, right? Use the minimum amount of energy possible. And you can think of so this is a panel, right, in the patent figure, and you can think of a balanced seesaw, right? A balanced seesaw is easy to rotate, because the center of mass and the center of rotation coincide. So you just need to apply some force on one side on a seesaw, and the seesaw rotates easily, whereas an unbalanced seesaw will be harder to rotate, right? So their overall assembly looks like this, and you can see that basically the patent basically talks about how they have built these mechanisms to align the center of mass and center of rotation, so that the motor uses the minimum amount of power, right, possible to rotate these panels, so that it can last longer, and so on and so forth. So basically, it improves the efficiency of the system. A seesaw is a simple example. I mean, in this case, there is more going on. There are a lot of mechanical components. You can see that there is a clamp, and then which is acting as a restrictor to how much this can rotate. So this angle is 60 degrees, right, on one side, and it can also go 60 degrees on this side, right? So you can think of this as a seesaw in very crude terms, but there is more work, kind of, there is more mechanical engineering involved in actually kind of aligning the center of mass and rotation, right? And you can go through this pattern if you want to know more. Their product also, they have a version of their product which is also terrain following. So you can look at this image, and you can see that the panels are also installed on a hilly kind of area, and which is not flat. So there, and you can imagine basically these the foundations, or these pillars that you can see, they will be of different lengths on a kind of a uneven terrain. Like the lengths of these may be different. So they have a version of their product which kind of makes it easy to install them on uneven terrains, which allows you to use more land, which is available for installing solar panels. So they have that feature. They have embedded sensor, as I said, to capture different kinds of data, weather, sunlight, energy production, any other conditions that you may want to capture. So these solar projects have a lifetime of 30 to 40 years, and that's roughly how long their product is supposed to last. So if you look at their product documents, they give you warranties of 10 years and 5 years, roughly of this range on their product. And after that, you can extend the warranty and so on. But when customers are purchasing these products, all I'm trying to say is they're looking at a product that can really last a long time, because these solar plants, solar projects are supposed to be producing electricity for a really long time, right? And so the trackers, which is a one-time investment, hopefully upfront, it's ideal that if they also have a long kind of time span, long life. The software section, so their primary software offering is called TrueCapture. So as I said, their primary product can follow sun's movement. Now, TrueCapture is a software solution that they give with their tracker, which you can kind of purchase separately on top of the tracker and kind of pair that with the tracker, and can use advanced weather forecasting, and it can use they say some kind of machine learning algorithms to find out optimized angle for each row, right? And then it can basically improve the overall yield or overall energy production by up to 6%. um, and so so they basically use advanced analytics and other data that they have captured from other projects and forecasting, etc., to improve the yield. And it also comes with some other features. For instance, if it's cloudy in certain parts and it's not cloudy in certain parts, the trackers may can adjust the angle. Or if it's a totally kind of cloudy environment, they have a feature called zonal diffuse, where all the panels will basically be upright at a 0 degree kind of angle to capture the maximum amount of light. There is a feature called split boost, where they reduce or optimize the amount of shading on successive panel rows. So all these kind of improved versions, improved ways to kind of improve your yields of a solar plant, they come with this software for different weather conditions and cell types. And then there is a NX Navigator, which is basically a dashboard for the plant managers to kind of monitor and control the project and see real-time data of what are the different row angles, if they need to change something, and so it's basically just an overview of how the project is going, what data is being collected, so on and so forth. So they have these software offerings that they kind of club with their hardware. Now let's understand, so these are specific offerings by Nextracker. We'll take a step back and kind of understand the overall dynamics of the industry. So if you look at the overall, energy consumption within the US currently, so these are figures from EIA, which is considered an authority on this. And so you can see only 9% of the total energy consumed. This is not just electricity. Across all the ways that we consume electricity in daily life, only 9% is produced by renewable energy. And within that, only 11% is coming from solar at this point. Right, and so you can see the total amount of energy. So this is expressed in BTUs as roughly 93.5 quadrillion BTUs. And if you look, if you drill down further, you can see that a large amount of this energy, as we see, only 9% is roughly coming from renewable. So if we are looking at the uses of where this energy is being used, right? So you can see that petroleum, for instance, 70% of petroleum consumption is going for transportation, right? So largely transportation is still a very carbon heavy industry or sector within the US, right? And natural gas again is being heavily consumed by industries. And so we are looking at basically how are these different sources being consumed among different end use cases. And so you can see that renewable has in general a large room to grow, and kind of if you talk about like the introduction of EVs and adoption of EVs, large there will be large decarbonization of the transport, and that energy, when and as it comes online, ideally you would want it to come from either renewable sources or hopefully from nuclear, which is also less heavy on carbon. And so what EIA projects is that from where solar is today, over the next 10 years, it will basically become the single largest source of energy in the US, right? So the forecasted growth rate CAGR is roughly 26% as compared to the other kind of energy sources, right? The second highest is the wind. And so by 2035, it's supposed to contribute 24% of the overall energy mix. And as I said, right now, it contributes a very small portion, 9% renewable energy, and within that, 11% is solar. So you can see it's the fastest growing kind of contributor to overall energy mix. And so this is about where, so the one is, one is a replacement cycle. So we have an existing energy for the existing needs coming from petroleum, natural gas, and other sources, other fossil fuels. And then there is new growth, basically new sources which will require electricity. So the energy demand itself is at an inflection point, and it's supposed to grow faster, much faster than it has in the past at a 1% CAGR, and now it'll almost like quadruple to 4 or 5 times. And the primary demand drivers are obviously data centers, because a lot of chips and AI and everything. And there is electrification of vehicles, and then there is reindustrialization, which means a lot of cement, steel, a lot of processes, industrial processes that were carbon heavy will hopefully now shift to more will consume more renewable energy and will kind of probably get electric over time. So there's a growth story and there is a replacement story, both of which can basically benefit solar. And also there is evidence if you look at the total amount of interconnections that are waiting, which means so there are a certain number of projects in the queue, solar projects in the queue, right? There are a certain number of projects in the queue that are waiting for an interconnect, so they want to get connected to the grid and they're waiting for an approval. So if you look at that queue in 2023 in terms of gigawatt capacity, a large majority of that comes from solar and solar plus storage, roughly 60% of it, and the second biggest contributor is wind, and gas. So these are the new energy contributors, or these are likely to be the energy contributors in the future. And so also there's a caveat in understanding, when I'm talking about gigawatt and so on. So it's important to differentiate between capacity and production. And so I'll just try to explain that with an example. And so, for instance, if you see this glass, right, and then you're pouring it through a bottle, I'll just try to set some context of what does gigawatt mean and what does gigawatt hour mean, because I think it's important to understand capacity versus production, right? So what does capacity mean is the maximum possible rate of production. That is basically what. So if you think of this bottle pouring water into this glass, the maximum rate at which the water can be poured, because it has a nozzle which is this big. If I just completely invert it, there is a maximum rate at which water can escape from this bottle and enter the glass, right? And so that maximum rate of production, or the maximum rate of kind of the water coming out of this is what represents a watt, right? So that's the maximum rate of production that you can get in ideal conditions. And production is the actual production that happens. So you can see in this case, the bottle is not utilizing the whole of the area through which the water can pour out. So it's not pouring out the maximum possible rate. And so the actual output is measured in the actual production that happened is measured in watt hour. So watt hour is similar to how much water there is in this glass at any given time, like how much did come out. So that is the total production. So what we consume is like the water, is basically the water in the glass, and the rate at which it came out of the bottle is watts, right? And so it's important to understand. So the capacity factor is the capacity which can be produced, like that's the actually it's the other way around. I think it's production divided by capacity, so you just skip that. So it's production divided by capacity, which basically means that how much can actually be realized, right? So capacity is the ideal number, and production, how much can actually be realized. And so for solar projects, it tends to be low. It tends to be somewhere in the range of 10 to 25%. If you look at a coal plant or a nuclear power plant, it tends to be much higher, 90%, 85%, something like that, right? So because they don't need any specific weather conditions like wind and solar, right? So wind and solar tend to have a lower capacity factor, and then things that just need a fuel. You put on a fuel and you get the electricity. You can do it at any time of the day, and so on and so forth, right? But in solar, when you see 100 gigawatt of installed capacity, the actual production will be much lower, right? Probably it's 25% or 30% or 15% of that, like some lower number. So that's important to understand, that solar will have a much higher capacity, but we will need a much higher capacity for the same amount of production in solar, right? So that's a caveat that you should know about. Now again, getting back to the specifics of this company, what is the internal ownership structure? If you look at their cap table from their proxy statement, there are 14 executives and directors which own less than 1% of the company combined, like all of these 14 people at this point. And it's important to put this into context, so I'll talk about history in a moment. So they own less than 1%. Large chunks of this company are owned by actually institutional investors, including Fidelity, Vanguard, BlackRock, and so this company is still but run by the founders, right? So CEO Dan Sugar, he owns roughly 6 million worth of shares. If you consider the stock trading at roughly $36 currently, and 1.5 million out of this he bought late last year in 2023 for 1.5 million in cash. So that's roughly, the insiders don't own a lot of this stock, and there is a reason for that, which we'll cover in the next slide. So let's look at the history of this company. And so this company is actually founded 2013 by CEO Dan Sugar, and then in the same year 2013 there are 5 other founders who have joined at different times. But yeah, so the company was founded in 2013. Then it was acquired by a company called Flex. I think it was earlier called Flextronics, but now it's called Flex. Currently, it's also a public company. It acquired Nextracker for 330 million in 2015, just 2 years after they started. And then in 2016, Flex also acquired something called Brightbox Technologies, which is a technology company, and which got integrated into Next, and that became their software center. Like it was basically the terms of the deal were not disclosed, but largely they acquired the ability to build software for their hardware, right? So that happened in 2016, and then in 2017 they launched TrueCapture. So TrueCapture has been around since 2017. The yield optimization product that I talked to you earlier about, right? It's the TrueCapture is installed on roughly 50 gigawatts of projects, right? 50 gigawatts worth of projects are being managed by TrueCapture. So it was launched in 2017. And then so the company was recently, like, they did their IPO in so this company was wholly owned by Flex, like, until recently, as I said. And then on Feb 13, 2023, they completed an IPO, and they did another follow-up offering on 2020 in July the same year, and they raised roughly $550 million, none of which was kept by the company. All of that went back to the existing shareholders. As I said, it was wholly owned. So when, like, Flex was paid, and another investor, TPG Rise, both of them were paid by, this money, and some of their shares were surrendered. And so after this transaction, basically Flex still owned 52% of the company. And then on January 2, 2024, which is this year, so Flex completely divested their stake in Nextracker, which means now they're not a controlled company any longer. Like, Flex doesn't control the company, and it's a completely independent company now. So they gave basically Flex shareholders some shares. Flex shareholders got some shares of Nextracker, so they had some kind of an arrangement like that. But at this point, from January 22, 2024 onwards, this is now completely an independent company. So now understand, like, the insiders or executives. Like, this is the company that was acquired and then spun out again. So they will build their kind of ownership in the company again over time. The people who have been running it since the beginning. But something to note about this is all the founders that have been, all the 6 people who co-founded the company in 2013 are still around. Like, they're still on the management team. Let's look at their compensation structure. So this is again from their proxy statement. Pretty usual. Like, there's a base salary, short-term incentive plan, which is in cash, and then long-term incentive plans, which is stocks, either based on performance, or restricted unit, which is just based on time-based vesting, and stock options, which are also at the similar. So they have a vesting period of 3 years. Usually companies have 4 years, but so that's the structure. This is also pretty usual. So a smaller amount is a base salary, and then there is cash bonus, and a large amount is in the form of stock, whether that's options, RSUs, PSUs, and so on. And so one important thing to note, which I will go back to the previous slides, the metrics on which they actually, that's actually the most important thing to look at, is how do they basically reward the management. So it's based on revenue, adjusted EBITDA, and adjusted free cash flow. And adjusted EBITDA is most of the times just a nonsense metric, but yeah. So these are the metrics that they use. And if you look at closer at how do they measure adjusted EBITDA, and every company can have a different kind of definition of adjusted EBITDA. The way they measure it is they take the gap in income, and take out the interest expense, depreciation expense, amortization, stock-based expense, and then they arrive at. So this is basically, not a very, in my opinion at least, like, all these expenses are real expenses, and they are very kind of representative of how profitable a company is. Like, you taking out these expenses and then reporting profitability is not very meaningful for me personally. So in this regard, I don't think this company, many companies do this. So I don't think this company is special, or their compensation policy is great. In my opinion, it is just kind of nonsense that most of the companies do. They report kind of profitability after taking out all these important expenses, and then they use that as a kind of a guide to set management kind of salaries, or bonuses, or compensation, which I don't think is a good practice, and I don't support it, but this is how they do it. Scale, margin, and efficiency. So in the trailing 12 months, the company did $2.7 billion in revenue, with a gross margin of 29% and EBIT margin of 24%. So you can see that a large majority of their expenses is actually the materials, logistics, everything else that goes in the gross margin. Actually, the cost of goods is high. The asset turnover ratio, so obviously this company also has some manufacturing facilities that are co-located, etc. And the asset turnover ratio, which is revenue divided by assets minus cash on hand, is 1.27, which is quite good. Revenue per employee is quite outstanding. Google level, $2.6 million of revenue per employee. How do they spend their money? So this is based on a as a percentage of revenue. 2% of revenue is in R&D. 7.6, 7.5% is roughly sales, marketing, advertising, and general administrative. So these are both combined under this head, and yeah, so these are their operational expenses. And if you look at 29%, 30% minus 9.5% here, you should actually come at an EBIT margin of roughly 20%, but they have some extra kind of credits, and they have some extra benefits, it seems, on their bottom line, which leads them to a better margin, like 24-25% EBIT margin. They're paying out 2.1% of their revenue as stock-based compensation. I don't know if this will be a normalized number like in the future, because just after an IPO, generally the stock-based compensation tends to be high. So we should look at probably a normalized number in a few quarters. But for a company with a gross margin of 30%, 2.1%, I mean, it's not very low, but let's see over the next few quarters what happens. They are able to convert 46.5% of their EBITDA to free cash flow. This is again trading 12 months, which is I think a major part of this may be stock-based compensation. So this number is not really that high, but yeah, so 46.5% of the EBITDA goes to free cash flow. They are audited by Deloitte, and then they have no violations. I mean, they're a newly public company. There are no SEC violations at this moment. And that's it for this video. I'll cover more things, like more details about this company, like peer comparison and opportunities, risks, things like that, in the next video. Hopefully you tune back in, and I'll see you soon. If you like the video, please make sure you like it. On wherever you're watching it. Thank you so much.